I am Stephanie Seeger, content producer here at CTS, Christian Theological Seminary. I am here with Dr. Suzanne Coyle, who I know many of you either have had in the past as a professor at CTS or currently have as a professor at CTS. Dr. Coyle, I've had you as a professor at CTS, so I'm particularly excited for this book chat. But before we get started, would you introduce yourself and let everybody know your role at CTS?
Yes, I am a professor of Pastoral Theology and Marriage and Family Therapy. I do teach courses for MDiv students and had some DMin students. My primary role is that of directing the MA MFT program. We have been accredited for 30 years by the Commission on Accreditation for Marriage and Family Therapy Education. A long name.
It is, but that's impressive. A long accreditation period.
Yes.
And I know that the Calamity accreditation standards are very stringent. So
yes,
that's a wonderful thing. Congrats on 30 years.
Yes, we're very proud of it. I've done way too many self-studies. So.
Well, thank you on behalf of all of us. And in addition to teaching, you have written several books that share your insight beyond the CTS community. One is Restoring Your Faith. Do you want to say a little bit about what this book is about and why it's significant?
Yes. I became interested in what's called narrative therapy back in the late 80s. And as I attended trainings for this particular approach, I was always interested in the fact that there were licensed therapists, there were psychologists, there were ministers, there were lay people, there were nonprofit leaders who loved this approach. And it just resonated with me. I remember telling, I was at that point directing a outpatient faith-based counseling network in Kentucky, and I remember telling one of the counselors, I said, wow, this really seems theological. And I think what really caught my attention is that it's all about creating meaning out of our everyday events. And so the idea for this book came to my mind primarily because I've never considered myself a contemplative person. And so when people would talk about spiritual practices like centered prayer, or I do read my Bible, I must say, so that's fine, but especially centered prayer, I would think about those times when my mind would just wander. But growing up in a rural community, I realized one thing I was always good about, and also good in preaching, was that of telling stories. And that my family told stories. And that the community told stories. So this book is a book, it's really designed as a kind of a personal devotional, if you would, about how you can uncover events and neglected stories in your spiritual life that are very different from the stories that you have learned throughout your life, and it's about developing new ones along the way. So.
Wow. So that sounds to me like it's useful information for a therapist, for a counselor, but also for a theologian or a community leader, or I'm even thinking as a parent of a 2-year-old, learning how to articulate our family story, learning how to articulate stories around what we're doing in meaning making is a skill that even from the beginning is important.
Yes, I think so. And I try to put in the book just some questions to consider at the end of each chapter. And the main notion is I really try to look at the spirit. I look at the spirit as a companion, if you would, on our spiritual journey, and the notion of God as creator, and then the notion of Jesus as liberator. So I use some basic notions of various liberation theologies in the book.
That's wonderful. So we've got a copy of this book to give away here at General Assembly. So if you're interested in that, definitely stop by. We'll write your name down for the raffle. We also got Uncovering Spiritual Narratives, which the subtitle is Using Story in Pastoral Care and Ministry. And so can you share a little bit about where this book goes?
Yes, this is my first book.
Okay.
And for some classes I teach, I have students read both of them. I just taught a course this summer that I hope to offer again called Narrative Practice and Ministry. I think it was largely well received, and we use the Restoring Your Faith as more of a devotional, spiritual formation kind of process, and this is development of this. I further develop in this book more formal concepts of narrative therapy. Some of them are externalizing unique outcomes, absent but implicit. Narrative people always have odd phrases about things, but basically all of them are about how we look at those neglected spiritual stories in our lives and some ways to develop them. So this is really written for both theologians, but pastors, staff members. I talk about how to use narrative in education, how to use it in pastoral care, how to use it in worshiping.
Wonderful. And then we've also got a copy of this book to give away. The final book that I want to share with everybody, I'm really excited about this one. It's been a bestseller, and because of that, is on sale right now on Amazon and other booksellers. It's being translated into a new language.
Into German, of all things.
Jawohl. Yeah,
yes.
And so this is more of a clinical issue, is that right?
Yes.
This is spirituality in systemic family therapy, supervision, and training.
Yes, this is what you call an academic book. It's kind of geared to be used. I have to say the real purpose of this book is I originally had the book contract with Springer Nature, and I was going to focus on spirituality in systemic family therapy. And I did the book proposal, and then the book series editor said, "Oh, you'll just have to stop and start again. You have to rework the entire book proposal." Well, I had worked on that thing for a year. So I thought to myself, really? I have to do this? So then I really thought, maybe the problem is I'm not really doing what I really want to do. And so I sat down and I thought to myself, what am I most passionate about in marriage and family therapy? And the answer came back, it's about doing supervision and training. That's what I do. And so I rewrote the thing from scratch. 3 months I had a book contract. class, okay? So it is geared to be used in any program that looks at family systems. Can be used as an adjunct text in doctoral programs. It can be used, I sometimes use it in some of our MFT classes as they're preparing for capstone. Some students read about the first 3 chapters or so. It's about how you integrate spirituality in this. Although it's primarily from a Judeo-Christian perspective, there are aspects that I think are applicable to other religions or spiritual sensibilities. So it has practices at the end of the chapter, and it also has, let me see if I can get to one diagram. It has diagrams in here about the actual model that I use. I was honored because I just did the diagrams and the conceptual piece, and one of our CTS graduates in the dual program, MDiv, MFT, Hector Hernandez, did the graphics and really jazzed it up with color and so forth. So the model that I come up with in this book is called The Living Web of Socio-Spirituality, and I use 2 theological concepts of immanence and transcendence, and I use them as a spectrum in that I think many times we think of immanence as just, pragmatic earthiness, and we think of transcendence as being totally apart from that. My contention is that we as Christians, as spiritual beings, are connected on a both and. And I'm trying to make the point that in order to really be spiritually grounded, to embrace immanence, that it really requires that we be attuned to social location and social justice issues. So all of that is in here. It has different examples of cases from both different religions, but also different gender orientations, different sexual orientations.
Wonderful. So I would imagine this is extremely helpful as you're thinking through those systems that affect a person, that a person is a part of, and you're trying to consider how spirituality is formative in that, both for yourself as a therapist, but also for your clients, because sometimes that could be positive formation. Other times there could be negative formation or experiences to work through. So whether that is explicitly religious counseling or counseling that considers spirituality as part of a person's systems, and part of their experience and meaning making in the world around them, this would be particularly relevant. Well, that's wonderful, and I want to give you a chance to share. I find marriage and family therapy particularly compelling. I didn't know about it before I came to CTS, and we have 2 programs in counseling. We have the Marriage and Family Therapy Master of Arts. We have the Master of Arts in Clinical Mental Health Counseling. But with Marriage and Family Therapy, I didn't realize this is not just about couples therapy or marriage, that this really has to do with the systems that give us meaning and significance as we experience life. Can you speak a little to what that is in general?
Sure. I think that marriage and family therapy has had a lengthy marketing and branding problem, and there was discussion in American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy about changing our title, but then it was deemed to be a real nightmare, with state licensure. So there are some programs that just call it couples therapy. There's some other programs that talk about relationship. the name that academicians use more and more is relational systemic therapy, and because it has to do with your perspective. It also has to do with, yes, people, numbers of people who are in the room. We get to be comfortable with multiple bodies in the room. Initially, students are frightened, but after they live through it for a few sessions, you have everything you need to work with there, with all the people there. Now, you also can use individuals as your clientele. The latest research indicates that over 60% of all LMFT, our licensed MFTs, client load is individuals.
Oh, wow.
So that means that if I'm working with Sally as an individual, I initially am probably going to get Sally's family history. I'll discover from Sally who she's experienced as being supportive in her family network, who has not been supportive, and who she's kind of adopted as family. So I'm really into extended families because so many times, especially for people in the LGBTQ community, folks have a lot of different people as their family. I would say more so than those of us who are straight or in a traditional kind of family. And so we learn how to work with folks. And when I'm working with an individual, I may also keep in my mind, okay, so here's Sally, but hey, I remember Uncle Joe, who was really influential in Sally's life. And I might say to Sally, I'm wondering what Uncle Joe might say to you about this dilemma you're now experiencing. Sally would say, oh gosh, I hadn't thought of that. And so I think that the beauty of MFT is that we try to always think beyond the counseling room. We also think clearly about larger systems, who of our clientele are oppressed by our societal structures, and so forth.
That's wonderful. I think that helps anybody to understand the significance and importance. We're here at General Assembly, and we're at booth 832. At the end, there was just a house built next to us. There are people coming by, so I'm getting a thumbs up from Chris that we need to up our voice volume.
All right, okay.
So I'm going to go into my my outside voice.
All right,
okay. Join me, Dr. Coyle.
I shall.
As a member of the LGBTQ community, it's so important to know that there are counseling safe spaces out there that offer services that are open and affirming and accepting, because there has been harm done, as you mentioned in the past. Yes. And I think there's that idea of more and more, hopefully, people are experiencing family support.
Right.
But very often that's not the case. This idea that we can explore family systems without that being defined in traditional means allows people to make those connections and find those supports. And I think the fact that CTS has the counseling center alongside our counseling degree programs is so incredible. As a student, I was able to receive therapy, and I know that you guys require counseling students to receive therapy as they're training. We also offer services to the community, but the significance of those students who want to become counselors receiving therapy, why is that so important?
Well, I think it's really critically important. And at many programs that are public universities, there are some issues around the requirement of being in therapy themselves. Although almost every MFT program I know encourage that for their students. The beauty of CTS is that because we are a private school, we can require it. And at least in the MFT program, students can avail themselves of our own licensed therapist in the counseling center because our current students do not know them from past years, you know. So we have that option as well. I think that I learned something in my own training that when you're a therapist, you can only take your client as far as you've gone.
Wow.
You know, so if I do not understand why a student would not want to have their own therapy if you're becoming a therapist, you know?
Well, and to understand and have that sense of listening and compassion for what it's like to be taken through this experience, to consider the systems that form you, the relationships that are a part of that, to understand what that's like, I would think makes you a better therapist.
Yes, indeed. We also have, we've always had an emphasis in the MFT program on what's called self-a-therapist, which is about understanding your own issues and how they impact your work with your clients. This summer, we did kind of a pioneering work that I think we do believe had some good outcomes. There is a program at Drexel University called Person of the Therapist, and it was originated by Harry Aponte, who's a Puerto Rican American, and students determine their signature theme through this program, and we've done that this summer. And so this will begin a little tweaking of the way we supervise in our groups in the fall, and in their individual supervision, students will be encouraged to say, okay, this is how I understand my signature theme impacting my work with this client. It can be for the good, it can be for the not so good, but it's a way of identifying it so that they not only do what I hope would be quality work with their current clients, but after you've been trained with this, it's going to become more natural when you have your own practice. I have to ask myself those questions myself in my own practice, you know. When I get kind of stuck, I'll think, oh, gee, what is this about? And I'll have to ponder that a bit.
So even as a professor, even as director of the MAMFT program, you're doing the self-work. You're modeling that.
I try to, on my better days, as I like to say. On my not so good days, not so much. But
I think that's something that is worth mentioning about the CTS program. My understanding is all of the counseling professors and all of the supervisors who are supervising students, whether they're doing internship hours, residency hours, are also practicing in therapy.
Yes, definitely. I think unless you have, you know, it's like anything else, you have to keep your skills up, you know, and it's easy to forget what it was like when I first started out, about the first family I ever encountered. One of my biggest families was a family of 9 people. It was a remarried family, and I knew it was going to be challenging when Dad and his kids was on one side and Mom and her kids on the other side, you know? So I can kind of get why students are a bit hesitant, my MFTs, when they have like 3 or 4 people in the same room with them.
It's got a lot of moving parts there.
Yes.
And in a rapidly changing world,
Yes.
I mean, things are coming at us at breakneck pace these days, whether it's societal issues, things that affect the family unit, things that affect individuals. Things are changing all the time.
Right.
So being immersed in that, you're able to help students navigate what they're seeing and experiencing anew in the therapy session.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You know, the pandemic and post-pandemic has really impacted family life. There's been a lot of studies about the impact on marriages, relationships, family, and I've not seen any definitive research. It may exist and I'm just not aware of it, but it seems that one effect of the pandemic was all that isolation just kind of exacerbated. If you had a good relationship, that you really turned to each other, you turned toward each other for support. But if you had a not so healthy relationship, it caused some more cracks and so forth.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and we saw that impact people in real time. We all experienced it in our lives.
Right.
Learning how to be stuck with one another.
Yes, right.
Or how to maintain those threads of connection when isolated.
Right.
Which is very different. Now, Dr. Coyle, you're here at the Disciples of Christ General Assembly, and it seems to me this idea of narrative therapy, of systems, relational systems, lends itself well to process theology, which I know resonates well with a lot of disciples theologians. Are there connections there that you draw upon in the classroom?
I don't do as much with process theology as I do liberation theology.
Okay.
I think that both is something that's applicable. I think on the process theology side, what is applicable is the notion in narrative work that one is always changing, and the therapeutic foundation is not about problem solving. All right? It is not a behavioral approach where you solve a problem. It rather understands people's problems as something that you learn to deal with, and that there will always be problems. So narrative therapists talk about thickening people's stories so that you have more resilient stories. I think that fits in well with process theology because it is about moving forward. Also, too, just the time factor. Narrative therapy is not about, we talk about past material, but it's really not about working through past material. It's about the present, and it's about always having a foot in the future, which sounds rather process-like to me. And one phrase we often use is always attending to clients' hopes and dreams. So there is that. I tend to look at, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, I tend to look at liberation theologies because narrative has a very political base to it. And its idea is a radical one, that every personal problem has its origin in a social concern.
Let me just restate that, because every personal problem has its origin in a social concern.
Yes. So narrative is all about, this is where the political comes in, ageism, sexism, heteronormativity, ableism, racism. I could go on and on. All the isms, if you would. And it tries to recognize the fact that as therapists, we just can't look at our client my earlier client, Sally, we just can't look at Sally as in a person in my counseling office or on Zoom, as the case may be. We have to really understand that Sally's impacted by all these different worldviews. And I've not seen the new Barbie movie. I must indeed. But I think a little bit of the Barbie movie was about, I believe, Barbie leaving Barbie land and getting into the world. Well, that's a lot of what Narratives is about.
That's great. And I think we're seeing so much happening in society right now. There are so many social concerns that affect people, both on a very tangible basis, but also the intangibles that sit with you. That, like you said, Sally's not in a bubble, right?
Right.
When there's a piece of legislation passed or not passed that affects Sally, she's carrying that with her throughout her daily life.
Yes.
And so, for people who are out there who maybe have a hesitancy or a different understanding of what therapy is, what it means to engage in therapy, who might benefit or really enjoy the actual experience of engaging in therapy, what would you say to a person who's on the fence, but thinking about engaging therapy for the first time?
Well, I think it does take some courage to go to therapy. And I think the one thing that perhaps is one of the hesitations is oftentimes it used to be that people believed that, well, they're going to be found as being deficient in everything in their life. That is not, and especially in narrative practice, that's really not the approach. The approach is to try to understand how the client responds to these dilemmas, and then how they can draw from their own personal, their family, their community sources, but also in all my writing, their spirituality. Because I do think that's a critical part. Sometimes part of my own critique about therapy is they can err on the side of thinking that clients can bring up all these resources. Well, I think we are creatures created by God, and we all reach our limits. And at those times, this is why I love teaching at CTS, in that we make no apology for integrating spirituality. I often say, I think students know when they come here what we're about. Our name is Christian Theological Seminary. But it's also so unique. I should really work in recruitment, shouldn't I? It's really so impressive because we also are open-minded.
Well, and I think that there is that understanding and that question initially of, is this Christian therapy? And the answer is no.
Right. That's what
not necessarily. But this is therapy that takes seriously the role of spirituality.
Yes.
However that is expressed in its diverse understanding.
Right.
Affects a person in their life, how it affects their experiences, but also how they can draw from it as one of those sources that you speak about.
Yes, exactly. And I often say that I think what you need to do as a therapist in integrating spirituality into therapy is to really get to know your client's worldview. And some people are maybe more conservative religiously than I am. I remember many years ago when I had a practice in Lexington, Kentucky, I had a client who had traced her perfectionism. She was a book editor, so that comes in handy if you're a perfectionist, you know. But it wreaked havoc with her family life. And she told me she said, I remember that when I was in Sunday school, we used the King James Version Bible, she said. And the quote was, "Be ye therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." And she wanted to use a Bible to look it up. I had no Bible in my office. She said to me, "What are you doing as a pastoral counselor and not having a Bible in your office?" Since then, I've always had a Bible in my office. And with some clients, I might use scripture. With some, I might pray. Some of my colleagues may just really shudder when I say that. But there's some I don't. And there's some I have to craft and hone my approach to meet my clients' needs. You know, it's not the place to proselytize in the counseling room.
It's really meeting a person where they are.
Yes.
I would imagine, have you had clients over the years that you've had to learn more about their understanding of spirituality?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, very much so. And I remember, again, a client I had when I was practicing in Lexington. She had gotten referred to me at the University of Kentucky by one of the campus ministers. But she said, "I want you to realize I'm not religious." I said, "That's okay." We worked with each other for months, and then she felt like she was ready to terminate. And she said to me, "You know, when I came in here, I said I was not religious. I now believe that was right. I'm not religious, and I am very spiritual." So I think that's another example of how you have to work with your clients.
This is just wonderful. And I have one more question for you that I want to ask, because I think there is a mental health crisis.
Yes, indeed.
Going on in our state, in Indiana, where CTS is located, in our country, in our world. And there is a great need. And we see that resources are struggling to keep up with meeting that need. It is perhaps more important than ever that we have qualified therapists entering the workforce, able to serve and meet that need. And CTS is graduating therapists each year,
yes.
prepared to sit through licensure requirements and become licensed therapists and see clients. What is it about CTS that is preparing graduates so well to meet that need?
Well, I'm going to give an example. I've trained in Chicago with Jill Friedman, who's an internationally known narrative therapist. And when I first wanted her to meet with my MFTs, those were days where we did take a road trip, she said, "No, they won't know the right questions to ask." Since then, she whispered to me one day when she was here for a conference at CTS. She said, "Suzanne, the other programs, everyone asks appropriate academic questions, but your students knew how to ask questions." So I think that the real difference, which I'm very proud of, is that we try to train our students to think outside the box. We try to get them to create curious questions and Does that make it easy on us as faculty and supervisors? No, it sure does not, because they push back on things. And I told, at the time, Interim Dean Saylor, I said, you know, it's an interesting thing when your students start actually modeling what you've taught them to do, and sometimes it's a bit unpleasant, but in the end, always rewarding. So I think that's it.
I think that's wonderful. And it sounds like there is a high demand for CTS graduates.
The MFT program has a 100% job placement rate.
That's incredible. So 100%
Right.
of graduates
Right.
placed working in their field.
Right.
Just incredible. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for the work that you do. For the work that you do in overseeing the program and teaching our students. The faculty in the program are just incredible. And I so appreciate everything that you guys put into this program,
Yes.
into our students and our graduates. Is there anything that you want to leave our community with as we wrap up? A parting thought for those who may consider coming to CTS to study?
Well, I would say that it is a place where it will be uncomfortable many times, because I do believe that we are further along on many of these issues, like LGBTQ issues, race, culture. Have we arrived? No, we have not arrived. And sometimes we're at a place where raw emotion gets evoked. So it won't be a bed of roses, but at the end of, I think, your time at CTS, you will be proud that you went to CTS. I always, every time we have a site visit, self-study, I've done 3 since I've been here, the site visit team always says, your students really know how to think. And I think if you want to learn how to think in this chaotic, crazy world that is broken, come to CTS.
Come to CTS. And what a full circle moment. It's not about making problems eliminated. That's never
it's
going to
not.
happen.
No.
It's about helping people learn how to engage the problems that will inevitably come up in life,
Right.
and to be able to do that in a sustainable way, to be able to do that in a way that they are proud of, and in a way that transforms this world for good.
Right. That's why I love teaching at CTS. It's about transformation, and I should say a transformative journey, on and on. But yes.
Well, I'm proud to be a CTS graduate. I'm proud to have had you as a professor, and I am so grateful for this conversation. Thank you for taking time to chat with us, and I wish you the best in the school year to come.
Yes, indeed. It's bearing down on us. So very good. Thank you so much, Stephanie.